and welcome to Lunchtime series where we add value to people's lives, happening every weekday on ebizradio.com. You can catch the Lunchtime series on all major podcast channels, and today, as you know, we're always changing it up, and the Lunchtime coaching series is now moving to coaching conversations. And I had, I want to be able to discuss and unravel some information around business and personal health and what, why, and how we can solve topics of discussion. And I thought, who better to ask than a colleague and fellow coach, and she's been on the show before. She's the director and co-owner of Raintree Business Coaching. Please welcome to the show, Leoni Coetzee. How are you doing, Leoni?
Great, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Kevin. I must say, when you introduce me like that, I feel very, very important. I think you must do that more often.
Well, when we had this first conversation, I initially thought, I didn't want someone to come from a stance that I do, and mine's all about the brain and all about emotions and the whole brain language thing and all of that. Like who offers a completely different perspective, but yet someone I get along with and we can rummage around that information and I was like, okay, Leoni has tremendous amount of business accolade and expertise behind her, and she's a coach and so I thought, okay, I think let me speak to Leoni about this and see what she thinks. So yeah, just tell us about you. Tell us briefly who you are, what you guys do, and give us a bit of that intro.
Yeah, so like you've mentioned, I come from the business world, and it's interesting. When I started the coaching journey, it was about doing more on the personal development side, and I never thought I'd go back into business. But it seems like business is my passion. And when I found my business partner, what we really got excited about is understanding that we have people in business. And then we've got very important goals to achieve in business, and often the people get in the way of achieving that, and leadership, and all of our personal limitations. And we often lack the skills and the ability to be the best leaders and managers in business. And then my business partner, Angela Healy, which I'm sure we'll finally drag her here, Kevin, that she'll join us.
Yes.
We founded Raintree to focus specifically on helping business and people in business to achieve their business objectives. So we position ourselves as business coaches. We work with very pragmatic tools to support people and really showing up in the best that they can as leaders and managers in business. Yeah, so that's us, Raintree Business Coaching.
Fantastic. So, Leoni, when we started the conversation, we did a bit of a poll. We did this poll online. It was like, okay, what are some of the major conversations that people want to talk about? We looked at burnout. We looked at conflict. We looked at, there were two others that we also...
I can't even remember. Those two were just shouting out at us. Hey?
They were, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely see that in the business place as well, right? It's this... having the difficult conversations and avoiding the big blowouts by being able to have difficult conversations. But I interrupted you. Apologies.
No, so like part of what we're gonna do, guys, is we're literally gonna have topics of conversation on a week-to-week basis. This week we're literally going to be talking about conflict. It's something that often coaches like us have to be called in to facilitate. And we get so riled up and wrapped up in the idea that conflict is bad, that there's a whole bunch of information that we're actually missing in between that the idea that conflict is bad. But I just want to preface, from an organization's perspective, organizational conflict or workplace conflict is a state of discord caused by the actual or perceived opposition of needs, values, and interests between people working together. Conflict takes many forms in an organization. And the reason I chose this as the opening idea of the discussion today is that it's the actual or perceived opposition, right? And to start right off there, I think right there, when I have the perceived notion that this thing we're doing is in conflict somehow, or it's coming up as conflict, I immediately associate conflict, the word conflict in itself, right, to very negative, very limiting, very emotively driven conversation. When part of what conflict really wants to do is clear up. It wants to clarify, right? It wants to see the opposition's perspective. It wants to reframe and frame information in a way that I didn't anticipate or see it before, right? Conflict is not necessarily just this one thing. And I was looking through just before, we started as reference, the crossroads.net speaks about servant leadership, and one of the things they speak to is what's happening when conflict is happening. And they mention three things, right? There is a lack of clarity, there is uncertainty, concern here, and it's usually in the storming phase of the mood curve, right? And part of this, and I think it's such an important conversation, because I think there's a lot of senior management leaders out there who are starting to resonate that I need to be equipped. I need to have a set of tools in my tool bag that empower me or give me a technique or a model or a frame that I can actually start using, because long gone are the days where I'm the boss. You need to shut up and listen to me. Like, I don't care. Your opinion's not really very relevant.
Yeah, my way or the highway.
Can't do it. Yeah. What for you stood out about the conflict? Because I know, when we had this discussion, we had so much to share about it. But why conflict? Why did you want to have this conflict conversation?
Yeah, it's and I'm so, you explained it so beautifully. What I see in the workplace is where people really position conflict and experience conflict as the big baddie in the room. And because of the various belief systems around conflict, what happens is we avoid having really important conversations in the workplace. And what happens is we stagnate, we don't move forward, we don't get challenged, we don't shift perspective, there's no growth. And often that very thing, the conflict that we're trying to avoid by not having that very important conversation, then actually steers us towards a very big, uncontrolled, damaging, traumatic conflict experience, which then confirms the belief that conflict is negative and it's a big baddie and I should avoid having conflict. So it is exceptionally important for people in business, managers, leaders, to get comfortable with conflict and understand that there are so many benefits in business to have conflict. And when I say conflict, actually what I mean is by having a difficult, challenging conversation, by allowing your belief systems to be challenged, by allowing the way that we've been doing things to be challenged. And to have those conversations. If someone is not doing something right, before it has a real impact on your business, have the conversation. Why are we avoiding the conversation? And I can't tell you how many times, actually, to the point where we've developed a coaching program specifically supporting younger managements or leaders to what do I always say here? It's to build the muscle to be able to have difficult conversations, to avoid those big, uncontrollable, traumatic conflict situations. But even those often have benefits to business. We're working with a team now that it was fascinating. They were top heavy. The business was really, really in financial trouble. And eventually, one of the key executive team members really just made the nail very sharp enough and created a massive conflict situation in the business. It shook up everything in the business, but it was exactly what they needed to really start looking differently at different solutions. And that business will survive because she was brave enough and bold enough to create that, right? That big conflict situation. Yeah, so I agree with you. It's and that's why I get excited about it, is because we don't want to avoid these very important conversations. They are important to the success of our business.
Yeah, so what I want to touch on as well is, guys, one of the things that we don't recognize, and one of the things that we often get stuck with, is the moment conflict arises, because we have generally we have a preconceived notion about it. It starts in your head. It starts there in your head. You walk into that meeting going, oh, I know what this is about. You're already languaging information to yourself that you're priming yourself for this bad thing that's going to happen. We don't walk into that meeting going, do you know what? I'm going to have a really good conversation. I come hell or high water. We're going to have a successful conversation. We don't speak to ourselves in a way that supports the thing, the state, and the behavior that's about to happen. And self-talk, I think people, just because you're not doing it out loud, well, some people, doesn't mean that you're not doing it, right? And we really need to understand the conversation that I'm having that starts literally in my head is going to affect how I feel, what my state is doing about it, is going to feel how I then respond according to that state. So if I'm not congruently in alignment with what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and what I'm doing, I'm probably going in there already with, armor up, and I'm ready for a fight. Your gloves are on. That's your approach, right? And it all starts by that thing. You're like, oh yes, I'm priming my brain to know that I'm about to do something that I need to defend, right? That's the one thing that we have to cognizantly be aware of is self-talk. The other thing that I think people also don't recognize is their language, right? When I language, we've got conflict to resolve. You're already telling people, I'm enlightening you that we have a problem, right? And that there's conflict. So you're already priming people into that position of going, okay, cool, this is what's happening. We're not going saying, guys, we've had some challenges that have come up in the last couple of weeks, and I want us to have a brainstorming session to resolve it the best way possible. What's the best possible way forward? It's just language, right? Yeah. But when you're going, guys, there's a whole bunch of conflict that we have with this client, and you're already setting them up for conflict before the conflict, started. So language in itself, like priming your brain, understanding the importance of what your language is speaking, because your brain doesn't go, oh, you meant that challenge we're taking care of. Your brain's not doing. Your brain's going, oh yes, we've got conflict. We have to resolve conflict, right? So, just from a NLP practitioner's perspective, right? Priming your brain and what's happening there, priming your language, and how that's going to influence the people you're speaking to, so incredibly important, right? And just to support that, if I start from that perspective and I start priming myself with what's the intentional conversation that I want to have, and how am I priming myself to do that, and what is the supporting language in favor of what I'm trying to achieve, and not conflict. Because then conflict is a different conversation. It's not saying, oh, this conflict we have to deal with. It's, it's things it's life, it's business, it's situations, it's disagreements, it's perspectives, it's perceptions, it's degrees of,
It's conversations towards a solution, right?
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, something that you guys also teach and you're very passionate about is the 4 core identities. Don't you want to speak to us about that? Because I think that's so relevant. The priming, the language, and the core identities.
Yeah, because
really give a good.
I love what you're looking at, that consciousness where I'm consciously checking, right, my thinking around this, and what is my intention, and that my language supports. And often we have the coaching conversation where I sit with clients and they go, oh, I need to have this difficult conversation with this difficult person. And we just kind of looking at it, but what is the intention? Why do you want to have this conversation? What is the intention behind this conversation? And what is the outcome? What do you want what is a successful outcome? And suddenly just that mind shift to, oh, it's going to be a difficult conversation, or it's going to be a conflicting conversation, into, oh, but hang on, we're going to have a conversation towards a solution. Just really shifts people. So I love
Yes.
those tools. The four core identity speaks to a creature of another nature. It's that unconscious stuff, right? Where our buttons gets pressed. We
Mm.
often use the language of someone triggered me or someone pressed my buttons. Now, the four core identities speaks to four of those buttons that gets pressed, and I'm sure you'll recognize them, and our listeners will definitely recognize them as well. The first one, and this is certainly one that's been pressed for me in the workplace, is competence. It speaks to how clever or how smart I am, right? Because people join businesses because of certain skill sets that they bring, and they want to have competence. They want to be good at and show their clevers or their smarts around what they do in business. And when that gets challenged, often that presses a button for them. The next one is value or worth. It speaks to how important or how valuable you think I am. And this is often where people in business and managers and leaders needs to be aware of this. It's that recognition thing, right? Are we recognizing the value that people bring to the organization, or are we pressing those
Yeah.
buttons and ignoring it? Um, and then the third one is goodness. It's how much I do in the world. It's I am a good person, and there's always good intention behind what I do. And you can imagine when that button is pressed by that goodness being challenged, it gets quite heated. And
Yeah.
another one is fairness. So I need to be treated fairly. I want others to be treated fairly. The business needs to act in a fair way. Our clients needs to be fair. It's the fairness button. Now, what's interesting for us on an unconscious level, because this is not that thing where we walk into the office and someone has a conflicting conversation with you and you go, "Oh, you just pressed my competence button and I'm reacting." It happens unconsciously, right? We don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
happens is in the brain, actually, and this is our biology, it's the fight, flight, freeze form that happens. It's the biology where the mind cannot discern between physical danger, the lion that's running at us in the woods, and I need to get away, or I need to fight the lion. The mind responds in the same way, and the body. So the pupils dilate, the breathing starts getting swallow and faster. Heart rate
Hmm.
accelerates, and you can feel that whoosh through your brain as blood is taking oxygen to your hands, getting ready to fight, and to your feet, getting ready to flight or freeze. That's normally where I go, like, oh gosh, I can't move. And then fawning, which is that busyness. I'm sure people will
Yeah.
recognize that when there's a big storm happening in the office, there's a lot of people just put their heads down and look very busy, creating the busyness.
Yeah.
So what happens then on an unconscious level is that the button gets pressed, and immediately the response is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And all of us have that different default reaction. Like I say, for me, it's often a freezing. But I can remember back in the day when I was still sitting at Exco, my MD and I had a massive big fallout because in hindsight, 2020 vision, right? At that moment, my competency button was pressed. I, of course, had no clue
Mm.
what was going on, but we were like two bears ready to jump over the table and strangle one another. Two passionate, you know, hot-blooded people that's very passionate about the business and their teams, um,
Mm.
and thank goodness, I don't know whose eye I caught, but I realized that I'm busy shouting at my MD, and that's not normally what I do, just for the record. But it was
Yes.
really that button that was being pressed, and thank goodness I had a moment of realization to go, oh, let's take this offline. And I do remember writing him a beautiful little email in the evening apologizing for my horrific behavior in the exco meeting. But it was such a beautiful lesson. So, what we do then when we recognize the button that's being pressed, it's understanding that we are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And in actual fact, the logical brain has been switched off, right? It cannot think
Yeah.
logically in that moment because all the blood has left the brain and it's taken the oxygen down. So we are responding from a primal brain. And what we need here is is air, fresh breath. We need oxygen in the brain. So it is that removing yourself from this situation and taking that 90-minute, let's think about this and let's calm down and let's get the logical brain to respond in a better way and not to react like a bear, right, trying to jump over the table and strangle someone.
Yeah.
So this is often a very valuable tool for people to notice and to understand in that moment, why am I reacting in that way? And how can I catch myself to respond in a better way? That we can rather have a solution-orientated conversation and not have a big, hairy, scary fight that doesn't bring any resolution to the table. Yeah, so that's the one of the tools that we use when we work with people in building the muscle to be able to have difficult conversations and resolve conflict in the workplace.
I love that. And I think it's such a necessary conversation to have with yourself. When you do have just that 4 references, kind of go, okay, which button's being pushed here because something makes me feeling really uncomfortable. And that's the other thing, I don't know if you've noticed that people take emotion and speak of emotion as this negative thing very often. They're feeling, I'm feeling nervous, or I'm feeling like this is uncomfortable, or like, part of what your body is literally indicating and trying for you to realize is something is happening that you need to be aware of, right?
Yeah.
So, having the 4 core identities like that is such a good indicator of going, is this one of these 4? Which one is being pushed right now? Because I'm really feeling uneasy. And when you have that self-recognition, you also have the ability to kind of go, okay, cool, what is the next best option here for me? What is the next best approach? How am I going to language this so it doesn't come across as offensive or defensive, so that I don't look like I'm just defending myself, but I'm actually going, wow, I'm totally triggered by this and I'm not sure why.
Yeah,
because
so let me take a moment.
For a reason.
Absolutely, and it brings that awareness for us to be able to tune in and listen to the emotions instead of completely tuning out. I often giggle. We use it's just a little, when we start group coaching, so we go on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling? If 1 is, you stay in bed and your head is in the cloud, and 10 is you're ready, willing, and able. Just give us a number, which that one's normally fine. But then we ask for a feeling word. And I find it interesting how many people struggle to just have, how am I feeling today? Because we've conditioned ourselves to just go, no, I'm in the workplace. Feelings belongs, I don't know where, but not here. And I need to operate like a machine, where our feelings are actually so valuable. And like you say, that those emotions are clues. And if we are able to listen and understand the clues, it helps us to manage ourselves better. Absolutely.
So I was going to go into a whole an additional conversation, but I don't want to overload this conversation, because I think this gives us really good compact information that we can actually share with people out there today to kind of go away. So for me, I'm going to recap and re-summarize what I'm taking away from this, and then I'm going to ask you. So for me, guys, at the end of the day, conflict can be reframed and re-looked at as the challenging conversations we like to have. There's a reframe of it immediately. Challenging conversations we like to have. Because why? Because in the curiosity of the challenging conversation, I'm going to learn something I didn't know about you potentially. In the curiosity of me sitting there going, okay, cool, we're framed at looking at the solution and at the end road here. So what is your perspective, and how are you coming from that perspective? Not why are you coming from that perspective, how are you coming from that perspective, right? Again, language, right? And really coming from that, priming your brain to be introspective, understanding that if you get triggered, that your brain needs to be on board with that. And really, what's the next best step for me to take, and frame information in a way that doesn't offend and doesn't just elicit more triggered moments for everyone else. Like to really, because then it starts with me. Then, you know, I can be responsible for the part that I am in this conversation and resolving where I'm going. Because then it's not just your fault because you triggered me. You have to have that conversation. It's like, okay, cool. Why am I triggered? And what's coming up for me? And if it's something you don't know, can't handle, then definitely see your coach about that and just unpack that and understand it. And I think that's why the word conflict, right, is such a big, there's such a heaviness to it, but healthy conflict really gives us curiosity. It frames information. It gives us versions of stories we simply weren't aware of yesterday because we actually engaged with it and gave it airtime, right? What is your summary, Leoni? What would you leave with us today?
I think for me, it's always taking it back to the business, right? For me, it's the important understanding how important is conflict in our business. That having those conflicting conversations will shift and grow and bring fresh perspectives. It brings us closer to collaboration and problem solving. And that the root is the self-awareness. How do I manage through, exactly like you're saying, to the language that I'm using, to perspective, that understanding, what is the thinking I'm doing in my brain around this? How can I reframe this and how can I language it in a different solution positive way that opens up to curiosity to bring solutions to my business that will take us to a far better place? And when my buttons are being pressed, how do I own that? How do I manage that to get closer to solutions and not, like you say, blame everybody else around me and gooi 'n groot big fat tantrum right there and there? Yeah, so
Yes.
managers have those amazing, beautiful, solution-orientated conflict conversations. They're valuable to your business.
And I think just on the last note, just those 4 core identities, when you prime that and you sort of preface and use that as a tool, right? You can go into the conflicting conversation going, guys, so here's 4 core identities. We know that as humans, these 4 core identities might be triggered. And if it's triggered, put your hand up and say, wow, that triggers me and I'm not sure why, and explain your version of it. That way you could even use the tool as the method of the conflicting conversation.
Absolutely. Right? I love that idea. I haven't thought of that.
Right, so it sort of gives you just a methodology, and the aim of these conversations is how do we give people tools to leave here and go out there and do it tomorrow?
Yeah.
Right, guys. So that's all I have to say. Leo's going to be back every month, and next month is an exciting conversation because we're going to speak about burnout.
Yeah, we have to speak about burnout. Sure.
Yeah, and the impact that it has, the fact that we don't realize that we're experiencing burnout, we think it's normal. That we've created such a norm about this burnout thing, we don't even realize that it's part of our habit-formed processes. Everyone doesn't have time.
And society has created this burnout thing as such a sexy thing, right? I am so busy, I don't have time for anything. I'm in burnout, and it's become sexy in a way.
Yeah.
And it's actually just made everybody so unproductive. No, we definitely have that. It's such an important. If I get started, like. Yeah.
So thank you for joining me, guys. If you want to know more, please check it out. You can email me directly on kevin@leadershipbydesign.co. And if you want to get hold of Leoni, you go.
Leoni it's Leoni at raintreecoaching.com, and also on our website.
Guys, if you want to get hold of us, and also on the website. So go and check out the websites, email us directly. And Leoni, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the chat. I absolutely love that. And I will see you soon.
Great. Thanks. Always love spending time with you, Kevin. Thank you.
Cheers for now. Bye.
Bye.